to see that. If you've never seen a baptism before, it's an amazing thing. And I'm always transfixed on the stories that people have to say, what led them to making that decision, what made them realize that this was the time. And what I'm always amazed at, is not the fact that the Bible says you should do it. The thing is, as Chris was sort of mentioning, there was a point in time where he thought, I can do it tomorrow, I can do it another day, and then there's a constricting in the heart, and I think that's the Spirit saying, it's my time, and I'm telling you, you need to do it now. And Chris and I were looking at this and kind of saying, you want other people to experience this. You want other people to know that love and faith. And I firmly believe that some of you will have something. It's in your heart, and you can feel it. And I firmly believe that's the Spirit saying, it's time. Whether that's time to be baptized, a time to give your faith to Him, a time to make a change in your life, I just think God is on the move, and He is working. And you're a bit silly if you choose to ignore the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Give in. Give in. Stop being a stubborn man if you're a man. Stop being a loving... No. What would be the equivalent of a woman? I don't know. Because women aren't stubborn. They're just lovely. So. But give in. Because God has plans for you. And it'll be far greater than you can ever imagine. So today marks Palm Sunday. We can get that first slide up, Carol. That'd be great. It's the last week before Easter. And it's a celebration that reminds us of the story as we read the Bible where Jesus and His disciples came into Jerusalem, came into the city to celebrate Passover. And if you don't know, Passover was a remembrance meal to celebrate when God rescued the Israelites. This was during the time of Moses. And Jesus arrives in the city, and He's met with a crowd who shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is He who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest." They waved palm branches, which were the sign of triumph or victory. And the people made it clear by what they were shouting that they saw Jesus as a victorious leader, someone who is bringing change, someone they've been waiting centuries for. They believed He was the Messiah, the one who was going to topple governments and set them free. And this is Jesus, you see here, coming on a colt, and you see the people all around. And this would have been quite amazing. Am I turned on? Here we go. And then you see this picture, and this picture is a picture of Caesar as he was entering in. And it's kind of the same. I don't know if we can, that will go back. You have the same people praising and glorifying. And then you have Caesar and the same people praising and glorifying. What a sight this must have been. The city would have been full of thousands and thousands. Some think there would have been 100,000 people in this city, which was big, but nothing like what we can imagine today. There would have been an air of excitement. There would have been something tangible, like when lightning's about to strike and you just feel like something is going to happen. And they saw Jesus as the bringer of change. And they watched Him go, and they followed behind. And they were waiting for this, and then a change took place because they went right to the temple instead of left towards the seat of government. This doesn't make any sense. Maybe Jesus wanted to pray first. That makes sense. That must be it. Jesus wanted to pray first. And so they waited. They waited for Him to come out of the temple. And of course, Him and His disciples come out. Excellent. And they followed Him, ready for the change. And Jesus and His disciples carry on to the other side of the city and out to Bethany, which was about 2 miles away. Imagine the confusion, the doubt. Isn't he the Messiah? Isn't this Jesus going to set us free? Even his own disciples, his mates, would have been questioning, wasn't the last 3 years leading to this point? They fully believed he was the Son of God. They fully believed he was the Messiah, and they believed he was going to set them free. But they go to the house of Lazarus instead for the night. Very strange. The following day, they go back into town, and in both Matthew and Mark, we read of the time where Jesus overturned the money tables. This would have caused mayhem, because everyone needed to buy animals for the sacrifice in whatever capacity they could afford. Some could afford the choicest lambs, others could only afford doves. But they needed to do this. This was a requirement. Why would Jesus do this? Why would he make his own people angry, much less those who owned some of this property? They go back to Bethany, staying again at the house of Lazarus. And again, the questions, the concerns, the bewilderment from his own friends. I can't imagine the awkward silence as they ate the meals together, wondering, what is happening? What is Jesus doing? The following day, they again go into town, and it was here the religious leaders were fed up. And they said, we are going to take this Jesus. He's causing too many issues. But Jesus evaded them. You see, no longer standing toe-to-toe with these guys, Jesus was maybe seen as keeping his head down. Maybe Jesus was a fraud. Imagine if you were in that situation. You've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and this proclaimed Messiah comes along, and he doesn't do what you expect. How dare God not do what we expect him to do? Isn't that kind of what we sometimes think? Chris mentioned, I prayed. How dare God not answer my prayers? Was he really the Messiah? They remain in Bethany, and on the Wednesday it's here that Mary anoints Jesus with this expensive perfume. What we have here, we simply cannot understand in the Western society that we're in. This would have been scandalous for a woman of her nature to come into a men's only event. I'm not even going to make any comments on that. And some of you think I probably should. This would have been absolutely scandalous. And this perfume of jar, this nard, is what they say, would have been very expensive. This was the Ferrari of perfume, or Bentleys, or whatever your flavor is of it. Maybe she knew something that others didn't. Maybe she had an idea. Typical women, they know more before the men catch on. She kind of knew there was something about what Jesus was doing. On the Thursday, a room had been prepared in the city. The disciples and everyone was going to celebrate the Passover meal, but they did it in seclusion. I kind of like this, but this is kind of what it would have been like. So our idea of the Michelangelo, I think it was Michelangelo that did the painting, and you've got Jesus in the middle and the nice tablecloths and all that. That was not what would have happened. It would have been like this. They would have been sitting on pillows and cushions and relaxed an environment. It's why it says that John was leaning up against his side. It would have been such a relaxed and easy environment. But Jesus could have celebrated with the other spiritual leaders. He had that right. He was recognized as a religious leader, and he had the opportunity to be with them in a prominent place. But it seemed Jesus was now keeping his head down. Another Passover was about to take place. What were the disciples going to do? We came to the city as champions. We came as victors. We had the whole city proclaiming us. What are we going to do now? They believed Jesus was the Messiah, didn't they? After they ate, Jesus asked for his closest mates to go out into the garden with them. Again, another good picture to think that the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, you can't really see it very well, but he's on his own. His mates are asleep, and he's in anguish. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane and said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him and began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch over me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but your will be done." I can't imagine that sort of anguish in anyone. And I know people here have felt and gone through torment and sorrow and hardship. Having someone with you intimately in a way that only Jesus and God and the Spirit know, knowing that there's going to be a point where that's going to be removed, must have been frightening and scary. Not my will, but yours be done. All of us are subject to obey certain laws, laws of the land, laws and conditions of our job or education environment, laws of our health, and any morals. We can choose not to obey these laws, but we will face consequences. And on the whole, roughly, laws are there to protect us, to keep us safe, to encourage and to support. But is our obedience to what we are being asked to do always worth it? You've heard Chris's testimony. He's already saved. And he mentioned, I think it's fantastic. I had no input to what Chris was going to say. And this worked. And I think that shows, God is at move and God does speak to us. He is already saved. He's committed himself to living for Christ. His baptism today did not save him. He was already saved. It didn't give him any supernatural powers. The Spirit was already within him. Encouraging, supporting, whispering. I would have already assumed Chris had been baptized because he comes to church, prays, sings the songs. And I'm sure many of you, possibly, who don't know Chris, thought, well, he must have been baptized because that's what as Christians we do. And someone might have said, there's no point in doing it. There's no point. From a secular point of view, okay, so outside the church, they might say, you have nothing to gain by being baptized today. From a biblical point of view, hear me out here, Chris's place in heaven has already been saved. It's already been set. John 14 says, Jesus says, I'm going to prepare a place for us, for those who believe. So your place in heaven, Chris's place in heaven, was already there before he got baptized. But from a relational point of view, I think things are going to be different now in Chris's life. You see, today's baptism has nothing to do with Chris's faith in God and everything to do with Chris's relationship with God. I'm going to say that again. The baptism today had nothing to do with Chris's faith in God because he already had a faith in God, but everything to do with his relationship now with his Father. The reaching out, the time is here. From the throne of heaven, Jesus becomes obedient to the will of the Father, loving us so much that he steps down into the muck and mire and joins us. He walks among us. He works with us, faces the accusation and jeers from us. The betrayals and disappointment, Jesus sees his path, and though difficult, begins to walk it. And for 33 years, Jesus is obedient. He takes on the burden of facing arrogant indignation from the same people he came down to save. And finally, his obedience is tested beyond measure. He pleads for another way, but his relationship with his Father is greater. And as one, they understand the journey. And Jesus accepts the task. Not my will, but yours be done. This is a tremendous saying, and it's very hard. And I want everyone here to understand that this isn't an easy thing to do. The obedience of Jesus, even to death on the cross, is an example of a loving relationship. Freely and willingly doing as another asks can only be done out of love. And that obedience is not burdensome. Our reading gives us some clarity, and I'll explain why. Firstly, if you believe in Jesus, you are a child of God. We are all brothers and sisters in Christ. We're not in this alone. We have each other. And if we claim to love God, we must love each other. They go hand in hand. You cannot have one and not do the other. That love is patient, it's kind, it's encouraging, it's supporting, and sacrificial. John 13:35. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Our obedience to God brings unity with him and each other. If we truly love God, we will express it by loving our neighbors. And when we truly love our neighbors, it expresses our love for God. They go hand in hand. Our obedience to God brings unity with him and each other, and that unity brings peace. Secondly, our love for God will be evident by being obedient to doing as he asks. And again, this isn't motivated by fear, responsibility, but love. I think church history has shown too much you must do. There's too many finger pointing in the church, even today. We should do things out of love. And we should speak to each other out of love. And we should ask out of love. We want to please our Father. And when you see a genuine smile on someone, when someone does something, like especially a child, if you have children and you do something for them, and that smile just, it enlivens, it lightens, brightens, it just glows. And it makes you feel good, doesn't it? Something simple maybe. Probably the box that the thing came in. But they love it. And it makes you feel good. We want to please our Father. And it becomes contagious. And you want to do it more. Our obedience to God shows how much we truly love him. In John 21, we get Jesus asking Peter, do you love me? For those of you who don't know, this is when Peter already rejected Jesus 3 times. Cursing. I don't know this person. And Jesus is there. They make fish. And he gets on his hands and knees. I believe this. Peter, do you love me? Then do this. Thirdly, our obedience to God gives us freedom. His command won't be burdensome. Now we need to clarify that God is not saying he's going to do it all for us. Or that it's simple. Because if you've been a Christian for some time, you know being a Christian can be bloomin' well hard, can it? Can we be honest? It can be difficult. But we can do it. They're not a strain. Jesus tells us his yoke is easy and his burden is light, Matthew 11:28. These are 2 oxen, and a yoke is put down on them. So the yoke is designed specifically for control. We don't like that. But when you have control, you can have freedom. A willingness to trust in God. When you align yourself to God's will, you actually have freedom because God is guiding you. Not my will, but yours be done. And a burden is something you don't have to carry. It's a choice. Our obedience to God is not forced. But in this obedience to the freedom, because God is in control and the creator of heavens and earth, will always do what is right and just. And Chris mentioned this. There is a point in time where some of you may face something and you have to ask, is God just and right, or is he not? I will not follow a God that is not just. What's the point? But a God who is just, we may not understand it, but if a God is just, then we will follow him. And fourthly, being obedient allows us to know God more. God desires us to understand all of this. It's about relationship. The whole Bible can be summed up in one verse. I'm sure some of you will know it by heart. For God so loved that he gave. From Genesis to Revelation, that is what it's about. Has nothing to do with the laws, has nothing to do with what you have to do, and everything to do about God reaching down and saying, I love you. That's what the relationship is about. Real relationship. Not what you see on TV. Not Love Island. Or this other thing that's coming in. We're not going to talk about it, but just horrible things. This is real love. Sacrificial love. Patient love. Kind love. Our obedience gives us victory over the world and all its desires and temptations, all of its pitfalls and snares. None of us like the word obedient. It's always seen as a negative. But obedience can be positive. Obedience can be liberating. You see, Chris's obedience to the Scripture and getting baptized, which I believe every Christian should do, releases Chris now to seek God's kingdom first, to put God's will first, to be free in allowing God to be in control. Chris did not have to do this. But I believe the stirring of the Spirit is saying, you need to make a choice. I've taken you this far, and I have something far greater than you could ever possibly imagine. Do you trust me? But God, do you trust me? I know, but science and my experience, and do you trust me? When you release self, you gain something much more than you could ever possibly imagine. And it is a freedom that I cannot tell you about. You can only experience yourself, but I can be honest with you and say, I would never go back to the life I used to live. I feel more free now than I have when I was living before Christ. Because I was always worried, always concerned. And now I know God has my best will, my best interest at heart. It may not be what I want, but I know he is a just, loving, kind, caring God. And I will follow him. Palm Sunday is all about obedience from a relationship of love. It has everything to do with God's response to us. He loves us. And he wants a relationship with us. But he won't force us. Maybe God is asking you to be obedient with your time, with your finances, with your talents, with your decisions, with your job, with your relationships. Maybe God is asking you to be obedient in some area in your life that you keep putting off. As Chris said, we have no idea what tomorrow is going to bring. Be obedient to what God is asking of you today. Remember, it's not about being a rigid follower of the law, but loving God with all you have and growing in a relationship with him. If you don't know God, give it a go. What's the worst thing? Honestly, what is the worst thing that could happen? Nothing or something far greater than you could ever possibly imagine. Either nothing's going to happen and you're just going to keep on living the same way. You're not going to feel any different. You're not going to act any different. Nothing's going to change and you're just going to carry on as if nothing happened. Or you are going to experience something which makes 3 grown men get into a tub together. Let's broadcast that on national television. The Spirit was moving. And so if you don't know God, honestly, that is real. You cannot take that away. We can debate science, we can debate nature, we can debate everything till we are blue in the face. You cannot debate that. That was real. That was honest. That was God. So if you don't know God, give it a go. If you are concerned, if you have doubts, if you are, fine, we'll work with that. But give it a go. Make that choice. Make that decision. And if God is just, banging on your heart for something which needs to change, risk it. Honestly, risk it. Give it a go. Because if you know Christ, if God is in your heart, and he's saying to you, I've got something that I want you to let go, what he gives you in return is going to be far greater than you can ever possibly imagine. That's a promise. And we come down to two simple things. Either God is real or God isn't. And if God is real, all of these things can be made possible. And if God isn't real, then it doesn't matter. I can't make that choice for you. Your family can't make that choice for you. You're the only one that can do it. And that's why we're here today. Not just because it's what we do on a Sunday, but because we have a heart that says there's something more. There's something tangible. And when you see someone getting baptized, I think it's amazing. So I want to thank you, Chris.